the kind of woman I can take so serious. She's got the fire in her eyes that when you look at her, you will realize beauty is a natural thing, original thing, and a mysterious thing. Raise up my voice and sing. I thank the Lord for a beauty queen, 'cause your black is beautiful. Baby, your black is beautiful. Baby, more. And your black is beautiful. Black is beautiful. And your black is natural. Black is original. Black is original. Beautiful. My mama, beauty in disguise. And your black is Africa. Your black is Jamaica. And your black is Caribbean. Your black is America. And your black is Nigeria. Your black is beautiful. Your black is beautiful.
Hello, everyone. Can you give some reaction if you can hear me, just to be sure? All right, great. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on the part of the country you're joining us for. Welcome to WTech Iwd Webinar. We are delighted to have you join us. Thank you. My name is Yemisi Efunnuga, and I'll be your moderator in today's webinar. For today's webinar, we'll be discussing the topic, Inspire Inclusion, Strategies for Diversity and Equality. So I want you to tell us your name. Please tell us your name, your organization, where you're joining in from. Please type it in the chat box. What you hope to learn or contribute to today's conversation. Kindly engage the chat box while you do so. All right. So briefly before we start, I would like to talk about WTech, who WTech is. WTech, the full meaning of the acronym means the Women's Technology Empowerment Center. The WTech is a Nigerian non-profit organization committed to building a more inclusive technology ecosystem with the next generation of women technology creators, entrepreneurs, and leaders. WTech is very, very inclusive. It's very, very concerned about inclusiveness. So in 2018, our work has expanded, and we're exploring how technology can improve learning outcomes and better integrate students with developmental disabilities and special needs, such as autism and Down syndrome. Our programs is majorly to encourage girls, young women to pursue technology careers and support women entrepreneurs to use technology confidently to increase their economic power and ability to speak about issues affecting lives. So when next you hear about WTech, of course, the name women, you know that we're very, very inclusive. We want to bridge the gap in the ecosystem. We are very particular about amplifying women's voices. And also, we want women to be, like we know, women are the future, or he's the future rather. So, all right, I can see some introduction in the chat box. Thank you very much. Thank you for introducing yourself. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers, and we'll be starting our keynote presentation, after which we would proceed to our panel discussion. In no particular order, our first speaker, Mrs. Ajo Afolabi-Balogun, who has a 14 years plus experience as an HR and ESG advisor with experience at the Ford Foundation and UNDP. She currently leads operation for Power and Learn project in Nigeria, an initiative committed to training 1 million software developers in Africa by 2027. She is a people officer and seeks to coach young people in preparing for the workspace. I don't know if Ms. Ajo Balogun is already online. All right, she's not yet on. Oh, she is. Thank you very much, Ma. Thank you for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you right here with us. All right, next, I'll be introducing our next speaker for today, Mrs. Lilian Olubi, who is an accomplished Nigerian finance executive and investor with over 20 years experience. She's a leading founder of a social entrepreneur. She's also the CEO of a finance firm. She's an author, an advocate for SMEs, and also she serves as a corporate and non-profit boards across various industries, including the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Mrs. Lilian Olubi, we're very happy to have you. I don't know if she has logged in. Okay. I guess she will join us soon. Thank you very much, Ma. We're hoping you join us very soon. So our next speaker I'll be introducing is Mrs. Bimpe Olufemi, who is a seasoned executive with over 30 years of experience across the financial services and technology. She has a proven track record in driving strategic initiatives, operational excellence, and leveraging technology to deliver value. Mrs. Bimpe is a mentor focused on customer experience, innovation, and high performance team. Thank you very much, Mrs. Bimpe. If you're online, kindly switch on your video. Let's see your face. Thank you so much for joining. All right, Ma, thank you so much for joining. All right, I'll be introducing our last speaker for today in person of Mrs. Bode Abifarin. Ms. Bode Abifarin is the former Flutterwave CEO. She drove operational excellence, strategic growth, and African expansion. Her leadership implemented scalable processes and solutions supporting ambiguous growth in the industry. She has facilitated regulatory approvals and established a strong presence across markets. Mrs. Bode positioned Flutterwave as Africa's largest fintech and is highly recognized for her transformative impact on innovation and positive change. Mrs. Bode, we're so happy to have you here today. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Thank you very much. All right. So it's a really packed section we have for you today, and we're really excited for you to join the conversation today. So right about now, I will be passing the mic to Mrs. Ajo Balogun for our presentation. Mrs. Ajo Afolabi-Balogun, you have the floor now, ma'am.
Thank you, Yemisi. Yemisi, right? Thank you so
Yes,
much.
thank
Lovely
you.
to see you online.
Thank you.
Very quickly, thank you so much for this invitation. I'm so glad to be here. And quite interestingly, I'm visiting my alumni in Durham, my old university, because we're having conversations around training, learning, tech, everything that is relevant in today's day. So thanks once again. So everybody, hello, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Actually, I'd like to say esteemed guests and fellow advocates for diversity and inclusion, good afternoon. Today, on this momentous occasion of International Women's Day, I'm so honored to stand, as is meant to be stand. I'm honored to be sitting in front of you with a profound sense of purpose and determination. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the Women's Tech Empowerment Center for providing this invaluable platform, hoping that together we can work on this journey toward a future where diversity thrives and equality prevails. I think those are the key words for today, diversity, equality, and obviously inclusion as well. So as country lead for Powerland Project, we're on a mission. Our mission is really clear, and that mission is to train 1 million software developers across Africa. Normally, we were saying by 2027, but we feel that it's important for us to just say that we're training 1 million software developers. I think 2027 is realistic, but we also don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot. And this training encompasses the fundamental principles of inclusivity. And by this, I mean that as it's sitting on a tech platform, the idea is that we're in every single corner, not only of Nigeria, but also of the African continent. And this is crucial for any social impact concept, to be able to reach the corners as much as we can. So I wish to underscore the official importance of fostering an environment where women are not only welcomed, but they're actively encouraged to pursue careers in technology. It's for women and it's for everybody, any individual that wants to pivot into tech. So while our project is boasting a relatively commendable 36% of women enrollment, there's still so much more to be done, and naturally still so much room for improvement. So achieving true gender parity in the tech industry obviously requires concerted efforts to promote diversity and equality. So I think that it's important that we implement tailored mentorship programs for women, providing them with the guidance and the support that they need to excel. Additionally, I think it's important that we prioritize outreach efforts to attract more women into STEM education from a young age and to dispel all this stereotyping that is so prevalent along the way. As an example, we're in far-reaching corners of the north of Nigeria, areas of Ajegunle, where we know that a lot of the people in that area have hurdles in terms of getting access to learning. So it's important that we're in those sort of communities. And our recruitment and hiring practice therefore mean that we are not biased in who we are bringing onto our platform. It's actually open to everybody, so that diversity remains at the top of what our perspectives are. So as we celebrate International Women's Day today, I'm so glad to announce that Powerland Project will be launching an exciting segment for women on the 16th of March. So please watch our social media handles. And this initiative will actually underscore our ongoing commitment to empower more women and to foster greater gender diversity in the tech industry. And as a matter of course, we also have a partner in basketball so that we can actually engage more girls and women through basketball into tech. So those are the sort of things that we're doing on the Powerland Project. So once again, thank you to the Women's Tech Empowerment Center for your unwavering support, and to all of you for your dedication to this important cause. And I hope that together we can shape a brighter future for a more inclusive future for our youth in Nigeria and across Africa. Happy International Women's Day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ma. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. Happy International Women's Day to you too, Ma. All right. At this moment, we'll be going into our panel discussion, and I would like us to start on the note of what Mrs. Ajo Afolabi-Balogun indicated on creating fundamental principles of inclusiveness. So my first question will be directed to Mrs. Bimpe Olufemi. And my question will be directed in this way, that how can we actually create principles for inclusiveness? Ma. I think you need to unmute, Ma. Okay, thank you.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Are you able to hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Fantastic. So good afternoon, everyone. WTech fellow panelists, I'm really excited to be here. So the question is, how do we incorporate inclusiveness? Is that the question?
Yes, that's the question.
Into our practices.
Exactly.
It starts a long way away. And what do I mean by that? Inclusiveness is ensuring that everybody feels welcome. So if we're talking about organizations, if we're talking about communities, is how do you create an enabling environment? And that starts with the policies and the practices. Now, what does that look like in practice? I have worked for different types of organizations in my career. When I moved back to Nigeria, I realized that certain companies had certain stereotypes. So you would work for an organization that is considered a Yoruba company, and that's because mostly the people that are hired are Yoruba, and even if they're not Yoruba, they speak Yoruba. Yes. Or you work for an Igbo company. Now, what that tends to do for the employees is that if you are not the majority tribe, then suddenly you're in a meeting and people break into their tribal language because that's what they are comfortable doing. So automatically you're excluding everybody else that doesn't speak that language. Now, so from an HR perspective, there are a number of things that need to happen. It's not just about having the policies in place. The question is, how do you ensure that so that everybody feels that irrespective of what gender I am, what tribe I am, what race I am, when I go into the workspace, I know that I am welcome. I don't feel uncomfortable. So it starts at the board level, really. What are the things that organization, the culture that organization is willing to embed? The board has to agree to it. The management has to agree to it. HR has to put the policies together and then start to imbibe that in the practices that that is in the organization. I've worked for different organizations that have done it either very well or very badly, because you can have organizations who have all the policies and do what they need to do, and we can talk about that later. Or you have a different type of organization that has all the policies, but it's just because they need to have the policies. The practices are very different from the policies.
Thank you so much for what you, I think basically what you said, it's very relatable because I've seen that happen personally, and I believe one or two persons on the webinar has actually experienced that. I would like some engagement in the chat box. If you actually experience something similar, kindly put it in the chat box. And you said something, Ma, like about having the policy and not implementing it. What could be the possible solution to that?
It's actually not an easy thing, particularly if you're a large organization. I mean, diversity and inclusion, even though we're calling diversity and equity right now, has only been in conversation probably in the last 10 to 15 years in Nigeria. So it is relatively new. And for large organizations, it's not an easy thing to embed, particularly in a nation where culture, tribe, and gender tend to trump everything else. I mean, we're talking about WTech here, where it's, about enabling women in STEM. But a lot of organizations at the board level and at the executive level are men. And I don't have anything against men, but the thing about it is that if we're going to enable women, the men have to buy into it because they are mostly at the top. So the question then becomes, how do we engage the men to enable us to work together in order to embed these principles and these policies? Because I don't believe that we can do it alone. That's just my personal view. These guys have been there for so long. So the question is, what are they doing? And I'm not saying they're doing everything right, but what are they doing that we can learn from and then improve on to ensure that there is a balance in the workplace?
All right, now thank you so much for sharing that insight with us. All right, I will be moving on to Mrs. Okay, I don't think she's right on now. So I'll be calling Mrs. Bode Abifarin. On the same question on inclusiveness and practice, how do you feel that relates to the fintech industry? Have you experienced anything of sorts that Mrs. Bimpe Olufemi mentioned? We'd like to hear your experiences. Over to you, ma'am.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Yemisi. So in terms of inclusiveness, I'll just continue from where she stopped, right? So the first thing is policies have to be in place if you're talking about inclusiveness on an overall level. And if you see the example, especially if you use the federal examples of particular governors that will be and that will tell you that, oh, in my government, 50% are women, is because they set out in their plan and their strategy that this is what I want to do. So if you're talking about leadership positions for women, policies that are entrenched will be very required. Now, if you look at fintech, for me, because my background is also consulting, and in consulting, everybody has a level playing field and everything is well defined. You do A, B, C, D, E, you get your promotion, right? So I've always had the mindset of what are the things I have to do to move me to the next level? Getting deep into what are the competencies, what sort of training, how do I have to develop myself, right? Because when it comes to promotions, it's usually level because competencies are defined and it's not just one person looking at you because you've worked with several people. I think in fintech now, there are lots of programs that are promoting, people are now becoming more deliberate. So you see trainings for girls. You see when it comes to tech jobs, people are now putting specific things in expressions of interest that we want 70% to be women because there's a real understanding that, marginalization is happening. So to your question, I think policies will help. There's more awareness and it's also for women leaders, supervisors, seniors, whichever place you are to, come out, to be bold, speak more. Everything that we have been doing and women have been doing it. We're all doing it, and making it work. Thank you.
All right, ma. Thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, I'll be moving on to Mrs. Ajo Afolabi-Balogun. All right, you mentioned the project PowerLearn has about reaching out to 1 million software developers. So I want to ask, ma, how well do you actually scout for these individuals? You mentioned, okay, some communities in Ajegunle and all that. Now, to go back to what Mrs. Bode Abifarin said in terms of leadership, competency, and training, are those included in how you recruit people into the project? And how well it relates to inclusiveness? Over to you, ma'am.
Thanks, Yemisi. I think that what is crucial for us in terms of the inclusivity aspect is that the entry level for our program is quite low. And when I say low, I mean in the sense that you don't have to know anything about tech. You just have to be able to fill out a form, answer some questions, and the idea is that you then get onto the program. And that is also why the program is scholarship based, because we don't want it to be a situation where somebody says, oh, I can't afford to pay $300 or whatever it is. So that is what we are doing in terms of reaching out to as many people as possible. Now, I think in answer to your last question, how do we recruit these people? We're doing a lot of work around those who are already in the tech space, those who are working also particularly with girls or with women, because our entry point is actually 18. But in the last year or so running the program, we realized that people are asking that, oh, I mean, why do I have to be 18 to join it? What if I'm 17? What if I'm 16 and all of that? So that has meant that we've done more advocacy in secondary schools as well, because obviously those are our feeders for the program. We're also working alongside a lot of universities, youth leaders and all of that. But again, I don't know if I said this before, but I want a situation where Power Learn project has been heard about by every single individual in Nigeria. Because even if you don't want to do the course or I don't want to do the course, the likelihood is that somebody within my network would be interested. So word of mouth is really quite big for us, in as much as we're also going into the formal institutions to do advocacy for what we're trying to achieve. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It actually it led to another question, basically. So I will still go back to what Mrs. Bimpe Olufemi mentioned on policies, inclusiveness in terms of culture. Now, you mentioned the age brackets Power Learning project is focused on. And if we're looking at a medium of creating, not just empowering the girls, also creating a medium of a mind shifts in them. And it's already within a particular age bracket. Personally, I feel that it's easier to have a mental reorientation for girls in secondary school. So how well does the project come to play in terms of having a mind shift and related to culture, relating with people and all that?
Interesting question. So what we're trying to do now, since like I said, we've done this for a year, is that in as much as we want everybody to be included, it was hard at the beginning to actually cater to those people in totality. So the program actually allows for you to run it self-paced. It's mostly online, as much as we have physical spaces as well to run the trainings. But what we've also done now is to have instructors who can speak in different languages. So I may be able to do something that is tech related, but I need you to break it down to me so that I understand it in my own dialect, for example. So those are the sort of things that we're trying to create so that inclusivity is actually what we're not just preaching it, we're actually doing the inclusivity. So I think that is going to be huge for us as well. And then just to add to that, we're also encouraging those who are on the program to actually come up with solutions that they think will make the program better. So we're not just saying that, okay, this is what it is, this is how we're running it. We also want the learners to be part of that learning in the long term, so that they can say that, oh, I did this, but I didn't like that. Can we tweak it this way? And I actually have the solution for that. So again, it's about us creating our own solutions instead of waiting for some other culture to come and say that this is the learning that you need. So I think that is very important for us in terms of the sustainability aspect and of course the inclusivity aspect as well.
All right, well, thank you so much. I like
Thank you.
mentioned sustainability, because I feel that is key for every project we're diving into. It's very important to see how well it's been sustained.
Absolutely.
And also, of course, being our own solution. And I think majorly we need to look into that very vividly. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
All right, so my next question basically will be directed to Mrs. Bode Abifarin. All right, I watched one of your interviews on Transform Her, and you had a particular thing that actually caught my attention on when you were working with KPMG. And so I would like you to share with us basically, because how did you, there was a period you mentioned when you were posted to a particular place that you didn't like. How were you able to manage that situation that actually gave you the, what's the right word? The momentum to keep pushing for excellence in terms of inclusiveness? Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Yeah. Okay, so I usually use that example when I'm talking to, people that are just coming into the workforce, right? So you can imagine I'd finished NYSC, I told everybody I was joining KPMG, I'd used all my money to buy my most expensive suits and everything. And the first project, right, that they put me on was at a time when MTN was setting up base stations back then in 2003. And you can imagine they just wanted consultants to help so that, they were not losing any money, right, from all the parts getting missing and everything. So they posted me to Abuja. So you can imagine I walked into the place and all I had to do was make sure that the engineers got bolts and nuts that they needed every day. I'll do a tally, like a reconciliation. So I was like a store manager. Meanwhile, some of my colleagues were in other companies using their laptops, their PowerPoints, everything. It was even the MTN manager that said, but you don't even have to wear these suits, right? So I just left the suits, started wearing jeans and all. I was very discouraged because I was like, if I'm here and counting bolts and nuts, doing reconciliation for store, understanding, supply, all of those things, and my mates are doing PowerPoints, they're in AC offices, doing all the work, that how will I catch up? This was not what I signed up for. But my mentor then, right, because, the system also gave you like a mentor, a performance manager. And I remember what she said. She was like, everything always adds up, that I should apply myself to where I am. I'm in KPMG. This is not going to be forever. I should take the lessons, understand everything. I think she really spoke to me that day, and I just changed my mind. I was like, I'll just face this thing and do it properly. So I just applied my excellent self. When they come, I started reading about processes, logistics, supply. And guess what? After I finished that project, right, and the project was over, I came back to Lagos and we had a big project with MTN. It was finance operations transformation. And guess the processes they gave me to map? It was logistics, supply, reconciliation. And the manager was just like, who is this? Because I knew everything. This was like my day-to-day. And that was, that just started the trajectory of my learning and everything that comes together. So I think it's just accepting the challenge. Sometimes you may not do some of those things you want to do, but think about, your destination, right? What are the things and what are the other things you now need to do to ensure that you get there? I don't know if he answers your inclusiveness question, but that was the premise of the conversation on the Transform Her interview. Did I answer your question?
Yes, it did. Thank you
Okay.
very much for sharing. Because one of the points I wanted you to highlight was excellence, and which I believe, and I hope you agree with me, is one of the strategies for inclusiveness. Because
Yes.
basically, people want to relate to something that is very good, and it doesn't come with a day. And there was something you mentioned that I noted that I think someone advised you being present in whatever you're doing.
Yes.
And I feel that's something we all need to do as a person and I'm so happy that you're here in person virtually to share that experience with us. And I believe everyone here is taking note of that. It's very important for us to, in as much as we want to strive for change, be that change, create the impact, wherever we find ourselves at the moment, we should strive for excellence. Thank you very much, Ma. Thank you so much for sharing this. All right, I'm moving on to Mrs. Bimpe Olufemi. And my question will be directed in this way. What will you say about women still being underrepresented in managerial levels?
Very interesting question. Thank you for that, Yemisi. So I'll make reference to what Bode said earlier on in terms of mentorship. It's very, very key. Now we need to look at the current pipeline of women who are probably at lower level, analyst level, middle management, and then compare that to what's happening at management level. And in the midst of that, throw in mentorship. Similar to what Bode said, I actually didn't, in fact, I didn't know anything about technology. When I was in secondary school, we didn't have computer courses. I went to university. I didn't know anything about computing. I actually studied psychology. It was when I went to the UK and I decided to do my master's that I saw a computer for the first time. Why am I telling you this story? When I was in secondary school, my father was an engineer and he used to teach us maths, my friend and I. At the time, and just talking about it now, I would say that he was my mentor. Because at the time, I could not understand why we all had to go through this maths thing on a daily basis. He wasn't a teacher. He was an engineer. He ran his own business. But he felt that there was a need for all of us to understand maths. And even though I went to study psychology in university, I ended up back in tech. So what am I saying here? If we go back to the organization, firstly, you need to have a pool of women who actually have been mentored into the STEM subjects, for example. And that could be through, having a favorite teacher who takes a personal interest in a particular girl, or it could be parents, or it could be programs similar to what Ajo and her company is doing, where they're actually developing an interest in young girls in the STEM area. Because the reality is that a lot of the things that we are excited about, that we are passionate about, and I can speak for myself, are those things that you learn when you're young. You have no fear when you're young. The world is your oyster. So the things that you learn there kind of almost takes you through life. If we're able to bring women like that into the organizations, then we talk about mentorship in the organization. I find that organizations that I have worked for, some have very good mentorship programs and some need to improve their mentorship programs. Everybody talks about mentorship, but mentorship is not just something that you have on paper. It requires a lot of work and it requires guidance. I've worked for organizations where they've said to their managers, you go and figure out how you're going to mentor this person. There is no guideline. There is no training for the mentor. So if the mentor doesn't know what they're doing, the mentee suffers. It needs to be intentional, and that comes from the top. By the time you mentor young people, you begin to understand who is actually going to get to senior management level. And then you have an open playing field for that. I believe that mentors need to be both men and women. And why do I say this? Again, I have noticed a trend in organizations that I have worked with that typically the mentors for women, or for girls, are women. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. But if we are looking to get to board level, management level, executive level, we need, in my opinion, a combination of men and women. Why do we need the men? The men have a different way of networking, and I'm bringing networking into this. They have a different way in which they network with the young guys who are their mentees. Women have a different way of working with young girls. But to get to where the guys are, we also need to know what they're doing. How do they do what they're doing? Part of the things that guys do in their mentorship is that they all meet, at very odd hours, probably in a bar or, a men's club. That's their thing. Now, a lot of women can't do that because of the timing of it, because of family commitments, et cetera, But maybe we can learn from that and apply it in the way that we mentor. So I think a joint mentorship of both men and women would actually help women move up the ladder faster. At the moment, I think that there are a lot of things that stop women from getting to the leadership level. We have to talk about family commitments. Are women able to spend longer hours in the office when their family is at home? It's very difficult. So what do you put in place? You make it comfortable. You make the environment enabling for them to have access to their family if they need to do long hours. You also need to create flexible working hours. We live in an age, particularly after COVID, where remote or hybrid working is possible. I find that a lot of organizations in Nigeria have not bought into that yet. Yes, abroad also, but more so in Nigeria. And a lot of reasons why that happens is because how do you measure the productivity level of your workers? That's an HR thing, and Ajo may be able to help us with that. But from what I hear, that is the most difficult thing that employers struggle with. How do we know that they are doing what they're supposed to do? It's supposed to be about deliverables, not how many hours you spend doing the job. So there's that aspect also. There's the aspect of networking. How do we ensure that women are networking in the most appropriate way? There's the aspect of mentorship. How do we get the right mentorship so that they have a direct line to leadership? And I think if we look at all of those things, companies are doing them, but the thing is, how can we do them better? I think those are the conversations that we need to be having. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much for sharing such wonderful insights with us. All right. I'm moving next to Mrs. Lilian Olubi. Mrs. Bimpe emphasized on having flexible work hours in terms of how women cope with different seasons of their lives. And I watched an interview where you mentioned balancing success across life syndrome. So I would like to ask, how did you manage different seasons of your life and still achieve so much in your career? Over to you, Mrs. Lilian.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and I must apologize, please, for my late join. I had a conflicting meeting. Thank you. I think and in referring, I guess, to the interview that you're speaking about, I think I was saying that the balance itself was about using the seasons of my life judiciously. So whenever the seasons presented, I optimized in what that season could enable. And the examples I had given then was obviously, the time when I was back home, when my husband and I were waiting for children, and I took off time to be at home. I spoke about the time waiting when I was doing a lot more of my professional exams. I spoke about the season, in leadership, where I had more time to do other things. I also spoke about the volunteer work I was doing that enabled me, in another season of my life to be able to combine things together. And so it was sort of fully utilizing. Hello? Hi.
I can hear you.
I'm so sorry. I don't even know where I cut off.
Okay,
I went up.
It was on
Sorry.
managing the seasons of your life. That was the last statement you made.
Well, yes. So I'm not sure. I was going on my own. I'm so sorry. But yes, I don't know if I answered, what you said and where exactly I had stopped. But essentially, it was about, using the opportunities of the times. And so a lot of times I find, I guess, that most times, just the seasons demand different things. And there are times when, if they have younger children, there's a play on that versus a time when you're freer with your time, and it's really optimizing. And if that means a lot more time stepping back to do more studying, or stepping back to do something else, or the time when it allows, and reinforcing in terms of the energies and space to do more.
All right, ma. Thank you for sharing. I will just reiterate some things Mrs. Bimpe Olufemi said. One of the things she mentioned, I think why I directed that question to you immediately, was more on mentorship. And most times it's really good to get advices from people that have gone through similar things. And I feel that women in particular, they tend to give a lot of excuses why they can't do this, why they can't do that. And we've been privileged to have you online with us and sharing on how you managed seasons of your life, which I feel that everyone here should learn one or two from it. And it would be very great to learn that. And you also mentioned the fact that which I really connected with, is defining what success means to you. So I would really like you to emphasize on that a little bit in terms of how women can actually work with that to get to managerial roles.
Okay, so I think that, thank you. I think that it's important, and I say that because I find that a lot of times we are chasing after a world that might not even be our world. That because of the pressure of society and everything that we see and all the meters and what people have defined to be success, sometimes we're aspiring for things that may not be our journey. So I was saying that balance sort of starts from knowing to you what success looks like and smells like and what it is. That every one of us, and I think as women most especially, because of the different things that our lives consist of, need to step back to itemize what are the things in life that I would, that in my metrics are success. And there's no template for that because everybody's journey is different. And so I've met some people who do not have the aspirations that I have and who are content with just being the, best of something, if it is the home life or in something else. Some people are not looking for glistering lights. Some people understand, their own flavor and what they think that, they've been sent to this world to do. But if you don't start from there, then you're running headlessly and around, trying to find balance in what might not be your journey. And so I think that it's a good place to start, where we interrogate what our mission is and where we think our greatest strengths are and what we ought to be doing in the time that we have in life. And, and by God's grace, I've taken time to really saber through that on many fronts in the different things that I do. It's the underlying theme of what I think I'm trying to achieve and the impact that I want to see. And so I think it also balances a bit in how I approach things. So I'm not active in every area. I'm active in the area of my mission. And I find that in your mission, there's usually grace for your journey. Not trying to run somebody else's race, but what you think you're gifted to do. And I think it's important that we strip that and step back sometimes to assess what that is.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that. It's very great to hear that from you. That's very important to define your purpose and walk in the path of it. Thank you very much, Ma. So I saw a message on the chat box. There is no name of a question. So I would just want to say that if you have any question, there's a link. You could just click on the link and send in your questions. All right, thanks so much for sharing that. So my next question will go to Mrs. Bode Abifarin. All right, so I wanted to ask you, how do you feel we can actually tackle, because Mrs. Bimpe Olufemi mentioned the importance of STEM, when she mentioned how her father mentored her and made it compulsory for them to learn mathematics at a point in her life. So I wanted to ask Mrs. Bode, how do you feel we can still close up the gap in the STEM field?
Okay. One of the ways is what we're doing today, right? Bringing all these women to talk about their journeys, what they have done, and why they have done it. I know that now the Minister for Information is also doing quite a bit in terms of the 3MTT, the trainings for tech. A lot of tech companies too are now also, there's a lot of hackathon. There's now more information available. It's still not where it's supposed to be. At a similar forum, I think we're all talking about how people are doing things in pockets and how we all need to bring it together so that there's a standard and people know that, oh, these are the overall digital ICT skills available so people can access it. Employers have the same view. People that want to go into the job market also have the same view, and they can now say, okay, this is how I can build a career. And tech is very broad because now with digital and the next wave of AI, everybody now needs to know, technology is enabling a lot of things. So beyond the coding, the front end, even if you're doing finance now, there's a finance of the future. If you're a project manager, there's a project management of the future. So it's indeed, even in customer experience, you now need to understand how to use data, technology, the little things that you do, building macros in Excel, all those things now become relevant. So it's in all the jobs we do, and everybody now needs to say, how do I take what I'm doing now to the next level? Because technology is in everything. So a lot of work still needs to be done with all the private partners coming together so that, there's reach across Nigeria, not just Lagos. And there's so many programs happening everywhere. So access to the information on those programs, and also the people that want to learn too, they have to go and find and seek and say, this is what I need to do, and get the information for them to be able to start to build their career. But I just wanted to mention that tech is beyond the coding, it's in everything. Even legal, there's a tech, aspect to all of these things. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I love the fact you mentioned tech is in everything you do. All that matters is the application. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
I appreciate it. I'll be moving over to Mrs. Lilian Olubi. And I also like to ask the same question that I asked Mrs. Bode Abifarin. So I would like to hear your thoughts on how you feel we can actually bridge the STEM underrepresentation with women, and how much we can do to make it better.
For me, did you say Lilian?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know. I would like to deflect on that question. I think they're more, experts in that area, and that they are better suited to speak specifically to the STEM contribution, than myself. I'd like to deflect there, if you don't mind.
All right, that's why.
Yeah,
All right,
thank you.
So I will move it over to Mrs. Bimpe Olufemi, and I really would want to ask this question because you really emphasized on how well you had to learn maths and you saw it was useful to you. So from your experience, how do you feel we could actually imbibe some things into getting more people into STEM?
Okay, thanks for that question. There are a number of things I believe that we need to look at. Particularly for women, we need to tell the right stories. Telling stories actually has a very strong impact. I'll give you an example of something that I did when I was just generally preparing for this. I thought, okay, let's ask AI to draw me a picture of a scientist in a lab. Can you guess what I got? I just said, can you give me a graphic of a scientist in a lab? I didn't state what gender, what race, what tribe. Guess what it came up with?
A female?
Sorry?
A female in love, probably.
A female? No, no, no.
Oh.
No female. It came up with the first picture that came up was a white male in a lab. That was the first thing. And then I kind of redefined it a bit. And then it came up with a white female. So there's nothing in that narrative, for example, if we're looking at Africa as a whole, where it tells you about Black females. The third was I then specified a Black person. It then came up with a Black male in a science lab. So in none of that narrative is there a representation of a woman in STEM. AI at the moment is fairly new, is being developed. So in my experience, I even find that Black people are underrepresented when you're searching for things on, in AI. Why am I saying this? We as women need to figure out the stories that we can tell the younger ones, positive stories that would encourage them and motivate them to want to be in those areas of STEM. That's the first thing. The second thing is, we all know about Gen Zs and the way that they like to absorb information. I call it the McDonald's generation. And the reason I say that is that everything is fast, fast, fast. Nobody is really interested in sitting down, reading for a few hours to be able to get that information in snippets. So the question is, how do you generate motivational and educational content that these guys can absorb very, very quickly? There are a few, I'm not a TikTok person, but there are a few TikTok things that I have seen where, you know, things like financial education is being done there. And it's actually good in a way that the Gen Zs can absorb that message, even though they're snippets. But if they're interested, they can then dig deeper to find out a bit more about it. So that's the second thing. The third thing for me is, how do we even make tech or STEM in general easier subjects that girls are attracted to it? There's something called the boy subjects and the girl subjects. And I look back when I was in school, yes, I did, you know, the sciences and what we called then maths. But I can tell you that physics was not one of my favorite subjects. Why? Because the lecturer wasn't that great. Maths I liked, chemistry I liked. Biology is considered a female subject, apparently, if you didn't know that. But when we're talking about STEM, we're talking mathematics, we're talking physics, we're talking tech, you know, general sciences. So how do we make those subjects more attractive for girls to be interested? And I think a lot of this stems from our childhood. What are the things that we were encouraged to play with? I know dolls are not a big thing anymore, at least I think so. But if when you were growing up, it was like, oh, girls do the cooking and you know, take care of the dolls and stuff like that, and the boys go out and tinkle with their cars. Naturally, the girls are going to grow up thinking that that's the way things are done. A few will veer away and do other things. Now, am I advocating that we should stop playing with dolls and cooking? No, I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is that we need to expose the genders to the different subjects. Let them do different things, and then somehow they'll find what their interests are rather than moving them in a certain direction. And I think those are some of the ways that we can start to build a collective of young girls who are interested in not just cooking and, you know, taking care of the family, but also those tech STEM subjects. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, you did, Ma. Thank you very much for sharing. But I really would want to emphasize on the facts you talked about, the underrepresentation of Black women in STEM. And I feel that we are going to work towards that in WTech very much. And that's what we've been doing over time. And we will emphasize on our work more. Thank you so much for sharing that insight, Ma. All right, so are we moving over to Mrs. Lilian Olubi? And I'd like to ask you, Ma, about your perception of women in regards to investments. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Okay, but I'll just read the question over again. So what do you have to say about your perception of women regards investments?
Okay, so what I've seen, and I've been in finance for the last 25 years, and it's a very interesting anomaly, is that by record, and I've been, you know, I've had, apart from being in capital markets, I've had exposure to microfinance and core banking. And we have seen sort of from data how efficient women are as investors, as lenders. But on the other hand, we see how averse women are to finance and investing. Do you get what I mean? So most people actually feel that there are so many people who tend to want to run away when the data is showing that we are the most, because we have an innate sense of risk management, of, you know, of risk averse. We have most times, I guess, sort of that sense of duty, of understanding markets and repayment and all of those things that work in our favor. And the data and statistics show that that we do very well as investors. And so unfortunately, you then find that, but there's so many people who have sometimes looked at the market or investing as something that, you know, they're not skilled to handle, and then they tend to shy away from it. So I guess, it's really that a lot of education needs to go in there as to the simplicity of what investments are, that it's nothing, heavy, nothing that, is out of reach from understanding, and that we actually carry those innate characteristics that make us better investors. So it's very important, especially if we're trying to make progress, I guess, in whatever industry that we find ourselves. Capital and money is such an important part. We cannot deny, the capital with every part of our lives. And so it's very important that we step in and, let go of those inhibitions in our approach to learning how to make money, how to grow our money, how to use our money, and how to invest. And so, and there's such a, strong pool of information all around, and of course, advisors who can guide in the instances where people aren't naturally savvy. So it's just to encourage us that, there's no reason why we should have those aversions, but it does exist. To answer your question specifically, that a lot of women do have aversions about whether they understand markets enough to invest.
All right, Ma, thank you so much for sharing. All right, I'll just go over what all our speakers have said. I will speak on the key points. And we've all mentioned things relating to excellence, mentorship, learning to manage the seasons of your life, defining your purpose and aligning with it. Also, about fulfillment and mindset. I think just to sum up everything we've said so far. And it's quite nice too, because what Mrs. Lilian Olubi actually mentioned, basically, it's just about the mindset, because if you're actually looking down on yourself before doing something, basically, you would want to go for it. So thank you so much for sharing, Ma. So right now, we'll be taking questions. I'll read out the questions. Okay, our first question is, how can we encourage men to embrace inclusion? So I'll be starting off with Mrs. Bimpe Olufemi. How can we encourage men to embrace inclusion?
Wow, this is an interesting one. I think a man would be better at answering this question than a woman. So there are a number of things that I feel need to happen, and this needs to happen at the board level. Okay. Management needs to buy into it. The company needs to agree that this is the direction in which we're going. And there needs to be measurements in place to ensure that what the company has agreed is actually happening. There's a lot of work that goes into this. It starts with the hiring. Where are we actually hiring people? And I'll give you an example of something that happened in one of the organizations that I worked for, a bank. We generally tended to recruit from a particular university and a certain level. We only ever recruited BScs. But then NYSC then decided that they were not going to be sending NYSCs to banks anymore, to organizations in general. This is way back now. And so we were left with, how do we get new recruits on board? Because it's usually cost effective to bring in people at NYSC level. And if you like the people, you then let them stay on. But now that that pipeline, was no longer available, we had to make a decision very quickly about where we were going to be recruiting. And so we decided that we were going to pick a couple of polytechnics, and that we were going to recruit from those polytechnics. Now, it's totally against what the organization stood for. But I tell you this, in the first year and in the second year, one of my best, or a few of my best staff actually came as a result of that recruitment process. These guys were hungry. They may not have had the prestigious BSc from the prestigious universities, but they were hungry. And many of them now are leading, divisions wherever they are. So it starts with the recruitment. How do you hire? What are your rules against in terms of the channels that you're recruiting from, in terms of the diversity of the pool that you're recruiting from, in terms of when you bring them on board, how inclusive are you making them feel? Then you need to start looking at payment. How are you paying these people? If I've got 2 analysts, one male, one female, the general thought is that the male is putting more of an effort because he can maybe go and see the clients at nighttime and the lady has to go home maybe because she has family. So those arguments are put forward and said, okay, fine, he's doing a lot more. We'll pay him more. She's not doing as much. We'll pay her less. There's no transparency in the way that we pay our staff. And, sometimes staff talk to one another, but I find that when that happens, it creates disgruntledness. People are unhappy because they're doing the same work, they're putting in the same effort. Some are getting better results, but then they're being paid less. So again, those things need to happen. And that I don't know that could happen necessarily just within organizations. I think there may need to be a wider conversation around that. In the UK, for example, it's taken them a long time to get to this point, but they're actually now getting transparent with their pay. So that's another area that we need to start looking at. Also, we need to start looking at how inclusive, if you're quote unquote a Yoruba company, when you then recruit people who are not Yoruba people, how do you make them feel? So I'll give you another story. Sorry, I like telling stories. A few years ago, I joined a company. This was probably going 6-7 years ago. Joined a company, spoke with a certain accent. I've always spoken with this accent. I joined the company, they interviewed me, they hired me. And then in my first week, I was called aside and told, Bimpe, you're going to have to drop the accent because our clients are not going to understand how you speak. And I thought that was a bit odd until I met one of our clients who, right in front of me, started saying, oh, you brought all these Oyinbo speaking people again, a top client, you brought some of these Oyinbo speaking people again, da, 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 da. And immediately I realized what I was told. So I started to engage this man and realized that we were actually from the same tribe. Guess what? In Nigeria, tribe matters. It shouldn't, but it does. And very quickly, this guy became my best friend until he passed away. There was nothing I could do wrong, but because he identified with me, that was it. And I think we need to, as organizations, move away from that whole tribal thing. We are Nigerians first before we are Yoruba or Igbo or Hausa or whatever tribe we come from. Until that unity happens, and that's not something that you and I can figure out ourselves in this short webinar. But until that happens, I think that we will continue to struggle with tribe in organizations, with accents in organizations, with gender in organizations, but we can start small and start to build out. I think that's a way forward. I hope I've answered your question.
Can I just add something quickly? So
Yeah.
she mentioned the onboarding and how you bring them on. I just wanted to give an example. For instance, like we're planning a retreat. So when you have the influence to make the little changes, right, that promotes inclusivity, you have to go all out and plan with, that persona and that intentionality in mind. So the retreat was going to be out of location. And, we thought to the extent of females that had children. So what happens? Can they bring their children? It was going to be like a 3-day retreat away from the house, right? And we thought to the extent of, in the new location, let's get nannies so that they're not missing out on anything. Even the flights, how we booked it. So we walked through the journey of somebody that has just given birth, somebody that was, was coming from maternity. So within our own sphere of influence, right, as women leaders as well, as you're planning, you're advocating, you're also making sure you're intentional about making those little changes that also make a difference to how, a woman will perceive, what am I giving up, right? To make sure this happens, and just making sure those things are also embedded as you think about, the plan. Yeah, thank you.
So just let me just add one quick thing there. I mentioned earlier on that for large corporates, a lot of the things that we're talking about are sometimes difficult to implement. It takes time. But I think that if you're starting out your business, whether you as an MSME or as an SME, it is very important that you inculcate those practices now. It is easier for you to start your culture the way you mean it to continue. Otherwise, it gets difficult after a while.
All right, Ma. Thank you so much for sharing. I believe that's answered the person's question. I would like to ask Mrs. Lilian, do you have anything to add to the question? All right, Ma. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll move on to the next question. It says, have you encountered any specific challenges or bias as a female in technology? If so, how did you overcome them? So I think I will start with Mrs. Bode Abifarin.
For me, I spent almost 16 years at KPMG, and the way it is, there were different levels, different things that you had to attain. So I've always had the mindset of, what does it take, right? And how can I get there? So for me specifically, I think it was transitioning into tech. I don't know if it's biases, but some of those training just helped me to keep focused on goals and what's my goal, what's my objective, am I delivering on the goal? I think unlike when I joined in tech in 2018, I didn't really have like that group of people, the way you have mentors, people that you can say, oh, how do you navigate this? How do you navigate that? I think there are a lot more people now that you can reach out to say, how do you navigate these issues? How do you move forward? So those are some of the things that have also helped. So in the last year, I sat down with some other people that had been COOs elsewhere, and were able to share ideas of how you manage, some difficult situations. And I was wondering that, wow, I wish I had known this like 2 years ago. It would have really helped me a lot better. So those communities of people that have been there, done that, also helps to help you navigate your way forward. I'll just, leave it at that. Thank you.
All right, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering that. Okay, I would like to move to Mrs. Bimpe Olufemi. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
When I started my career, there were typically only men in the tech space. I mean, I started my tech career in the UK. I was used to working with men. I'm quite a straightforward talking kind of person, and I felt that I didn't know better. I didn't know different until I moved to Nigeria and then started to work with a mixture of men and women. One of the things that I have learned since being back is that with women, with girls, one needs to be a lot more sensitive in the way that communication happens, because coming from the background that I come from, organizationally, it meant that I was a fast-talking, straight-talking kind of person, not mincing my words. But over the years, I have tempered down a bit, because I realized that the deliverance needs to be slightly different so that people don't take offense. As women, we take offense very, very quickly. And in my first few years in Nigeria, working with a couple of organizations, I found that I actually didn't get along with the women. When I say I didn't get along, it wasn't like we fought or anything of the sort, but there was just a grating, if you see what I mean. We just didn't see eye to eye on a number of things until I met an equally strong woman who we had a conversation, it wasn't personal, we moved on and we remained friends. And that's typically the way that the guys operate. They can have disagreements, they don't take it personal, and they go to the pub or to the wine bar afterwards and they are friends. Now, is that what I'm advocating? Not necessarily, but I'm saying that as women, we need to contextually understand what's going on with the women that we interact with so that we can deliver the message in a way that is acceptable. But also, if you need to draw the hard line, then you need to draw the hard line. And I think it's getting to know people that you realize what works for them and what doesn't. It's not an easy thing to do, I'll be honest with you, particularly if your personality is a certain type of personality. So there is learning on both sides, on the mentor side and on the mentee side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ma. All right, so I'll be directing this question to Mrs. Lilian also, or in a way that actually relates to the capital investment industry.
Okay, so thank you. So I haven't personally, and if I'll be sort of very true to my journey, I haven't sort of experienced a lot of any of those sort of biases directly. And I was very fortunate to have great male leaders in the early stage of my career who were very supportive of women. However, I've obviously seen situations of bias at certain levels. But what I want to say, and without trying to sort of overlabor this point we make around the biases that we see, is that I think that the key for us women is to be people of value. What I have seen is that people are drawn to value. The businesses are in business to achieve something. And if you're a person of value, it is unlikely that you can be edged out because of what you bring. And so that a lot of times, a lot of the straws of things I see that people have experienced and where there was a shutting out, I think there were things that had answers beyond, they were not just sort of biases for bias sake, and maybe the biases exist from a cultural standpoint, but there were things that I feel, had answers from delivery and positioning and some understanding around the play of the good politics, of the advancement, of the knowledge, of the visibility, and all of those things that perhaps the women were shyer to apply themselves to, and therefore sort of missed opportunities, and it seemed like bias. And so I think it's just to circle back to that point of, for us to be people of value, we shouldn't see ourselves as, as people that cannot deliver. And I think that's a big part of dispelling some of those challenges that we face. And I've seen, of course, in my industry as well. So I just came off of the closing gong, talking about my journey when I first had an encounter with the capital markets on the floor, where there were literally I think there were just 3, this was about 25 years ago, when there were just 3 female stockbrokers on the floor. And to think that at that time, or just years before that time, ladies were not even allowed to write the exams to be qualified brokers. It was not, so there are people who had to sort of, foreigners who went in and have, instituted policies to make sure that those were changed, and all of us, walk in that glory of what they opened. But as far as, those cultural things in my market, in my industry, I don't see the barriers like that anymore. I think most of the doors have been flung open for us, and it's really now just a case of proving our mettle and being where we want to be. I think also for women, a lot of the challenges I see in my industry is that a lot of people are not coming in, are not thinking about these succession lines of leadership in how they choose their path. And so you find that there are certain lines of succession before you get to the top. And if we're all centered around the service areas and not those lines, then we're in a sense putting ourselves out of the range and out of the league in the first place. So I think it stems from, even the courses and the disciplines that we go into and the areas that we choose to pursue. Thank you.
Can I just add something to what Lilian, can I
Alright.
speak about something that Lilian spoke about, which is the politics. I think that's a major subject in its own. And I'm one of those women in the past who has believed that as long as you understand the politics, you don't need to play the politics. And I hear that said by a lot of women all the time. The challenge with understanding and not playing the politics is that, as Lilian said, you get sidelined because politics is actually essential in any organization. You need to understand it. And I wish, to be honest with you, that I understood that concept much earlier in my career. If you understand it, politics doesn't need to be dirty politics. You can play the politics and play it in a real and truthful way that is enhancing your career, but also seeing you as a player in the corporate world. Many women don't get engaged in the politics. And I think that is a key area that actually needs to be discussed, probably on a different subject. But thanks for that, Lilian. That's a key one.
All right. I think that will be all the questions we'll be able to take for today. Thank you so much, Mrs. Bimpe Olufemi. Thank you so much, Mrs. Bode Abifarin. Thank you so much, Mrs. Lilian Olubi. Thank you in absentia. Thank you also to Mrs. Ajo Afolabi-Balogun for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. Thank you everyone for joining. So I don't know if you would like to drop your links to your social media accounts in case anyone has a direct questions. If that's fine with you, you can actually do so in the chat box. So our webinar has come to an end for today because we need to be time conscious, and we really appreciate the fact that we were able to learn a whole lot. And I would like to get some reactions from the chat box. Did you actually enjoy your time? Oh, great. We have reactions. Thank you so much, Ma. So we'll be joining the curtain at this moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.